I started the night shift. My boss left me with a strange set of rules. The lizard display stood about 6 feet tall, and as I stepped back to admire the large character ready to pounce into a bowl of frosted cereal, I heard my name called for the first time that night. Not loud, but a gentle whisper, as if they were close by. My body tightened up, and I instinctively remembered the list. 3. If you hear someone call out to you, do not respond or acknowledge them. Just leave it alone. It will pass. What in the world was going on, I thought. I couldn't explain any of it as there was no one in the store with me. It was impossible for someone to be there. I checked everywhere. I knew I was alone. Despite it all, I didn't call out to see who was there. Maybe it was because of the list, as stupid as that sounds. I walked around the store, flashlight in hand, taking timid steps as to not make noise, and yet again, I found nothing. I dismissed it, thinking it was all in my head, and made my way back to the display. On my way there, I noticed the mannequins had their heads turned. I could have sworn they were all looking forward when I set them up, but now their lifeless eyes were staring in my direction. Goosebumps rippled across my skin, and I ran back to the display, wanting to quickly finish up so I could leave. But then I heard it again. "Dean," the voice whispered. The hair on my neck raised up, and I was ready to leave right then and there. Reluctantly, I decided that I would make my way around the store one last time before leaving, as everything was pretty much complete. I would just tell Bill that I forgot to clean up. I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem. Once again, I nervously made my rounds, but when I came across the clothing department, I couldn't explain what I saw. The mannequins that I had just placed around in separate areas were now huddled together. They were hunched over, as if whispering to one another. My body went cold, and the list once again popped up in my mind. 2. Put out all merchandise from pallets and build any displays as needed. Do not be alarmed if they move on their own. How could I not be alarmed? There was definitely someone there with me, and they were playing a sick joke. My heart was beating viciously in my chest, and the sweat was starting to seep out of every pore. Then I noticed something. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 mannequins. Where was the 5th? Then, before I could act on the disturbing moment, from the deafening silence, came a voice. It was soft, almost muffled. Not angry. Almost pleasant. But the stark contrast of their voice and the situation made it all the more unsettling. "Hello, Dean." It spoke again, just as calm as the first time. It was clear as day. I could feel their presence right behind me. An electricity that filled the emptiness, and a cold breath brushing the back of my neck. 4. If someone is behind you, do not turn around and speak to them. If someone happens to come to you, do not look up. Avoid staring at them at all costs. I wish I could have controlled myself better, to know what I know now. But my first instinct was to turn around and acknowledge who stood before me. Lifeless eyes stared back at me. A blank expression frozen with an ominous grin. It was one of the mannequins. The one that looked like Andy. The dim fluorescent lights flickered above, reflecting off its glossy face. My body spasmed and I struggled to breathe, feeling an unbelievable tightness in my chest. I was rooted to the ground, a thrum pulsing in my head, growing louder and louder by the second. Then before my eyes, it moved. The mannequin moved. Its right hand twisted and raised up before dropping down onto my shoulder with a speed so quick it almost didn't register in my brain. Its face was now inches from mine. I could feel it breathing. Actually breathing. A cold breath that smelled of plastic and a rotting sweetness that I will never forget. In that moment, something snapped in me, and I could no longer contain myself. I came out of my stupor and burst forward, running into the nightmarish figure. I toppled to the ground but scurried back up to my feet in an instant, racing to the storefront. I tried fighting the urge to look back, but I couldn't. I regret it. In that brief moment, I saw them all, staring in my direction, attention fixed on me. My body shuddered. I fished out the keys from my pocket, shaking uncontrollably in my hands while they approached. A disjointed march, the distance between us shrinking. I dropped the keys several times, and no matter how much I tried, I just couldn't get it into the lock. Finally, I gave up, and as they were about to descend on me, I ran and jumped over the checkout counters, their heads turning to follow my direction. Deeper into the store I went, their limbs creaking while following close behind. There was no telling what they would do to me, and I didn't want to find out. I wondered if Andy had known about those things. If maybe he forgot to follow one of the rules and now stood alongside them as one of their own. I wondered what Bill knew, and if he also had bribed Andy with a sum of money so large that he couldn't say no. Where did they come from, and what was the endgame? I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on getting out of there. I weaved in and out of aisles, running full speed and knocking anything down that would slow their pursuit. They called out to me, in a sing-song tone, taunting me. I was so afraid. I could feel tears running down my face, and absolute fear consuming me. I was worried my heart would give out at the rate it was beating. I decided to hop over the pharmacy counter, staying crouched down and waiting for God knows how long. Swiping through my phone, I quickly dialed Bill's number, wanting some sort of explanation, but only errors came up, along with no signal. Something wouldn't let me dial out. I tried to analyze the situation, but nothing would fit into any realm of possibility. The frustration began building, and I was ready to scream. Feeling defeated, I slumped down and cried into my hands, not knowing what would become of me. I thought about never seeing my family again, or being able to pet my dog. Images of those creatures gathering around me filled my mind, breaking me apart and turning me into one of them. My jaw clenched tight, teeth grinding. All I could do was hope for the best. Some time passed and I no longer heard any movement, so I cautiously peeked out from behind the counter. A few of the mannequins were close by, absolutely still and no doubt listening for me. They were waiting for me to slip up, to give myself away. I watched them for several minutes, their dead eyes and half-smile taunting me. I thought about making a run for it, but there was no way I could get out. Not like this. I needed a distraction. Then I remembered my phone. I set an alarm for a few minutes, wrapped it up in whatever padding I could find, and picked a good spot. I took a deep breath and tossed my phone with such force that it cascaded high over the mannequins and landed on the far side of the store. It made a loud thud, attracting their attention. Good. All I had to do now was wait and hope the phone wasn't damaged from the drop it sustained. If that didn't work, I didn't know what else I could do. Maybe wait until sunup, when Bill arrived. If he arrived. Maybe this was his plan all along. I thought about all the ways I would tear into him, question him about the stupid rules and why he picked me to do the shift. And then my phone rang. A heaviness lifted from my shoulders when the figures turned toward the alarm. First their heads, like animals, perked up at the sound of prey, then their bodies as they began walking away from me. I was done. Done with all of it. I was ready to leave, and so close to the exit at the back of the building, within my sight, and no one left to guard it. Crouched down, I slowly made my way from cover to cover, through various shelves and displays, past the double doors and finally into the docking area. With the doors closed behind me, I flicked on the flashlight and moved closer to the exit. One step closer to freedom. Now it was just a matter of sliding the bolt out of its place. I wrapped my hands around it firmly and gave it a pull, but it was jammed in tight, rusted in place, unsure of the last time the door had been opened. I started to panic, wondering if they would find me before I could escape. I scanned the area, the beam of light falling on a piece of wood, propped up against the wall, and so I used it to pry the bolt back. More and more pressure I applied, rocking my body weight into each wrench back, when suddenly it snapped, and the crunch rang out into the air. My heart sank. I stood there for a moment, hoping that those things didn't hear the noise, but when the double doors slowly swung open, I knew I was wrong. In they came. All 5 of them. crowding through the doorway, eyes lighting up in the darkness and intently focused on me. I panicked, gripping the bolt tight and throwing all my weight into it, twisting and pulling, the mannequins stepping closer and closer, joints creaking and popping with every move. They called out, again softly, a terrible unison of voices burning into my mind. I thought about giving up. Maybe escaping was not in the cards for me. Isn't that why Bill set all of this up? Maybe he thought I was an easy target. The energy in my body started to drain. I was getting exhausted, but when they were within arm's reach, the bolt finally slid back and I threw the door wide open. The cold night air kissed my skin and for a moment I was relieved, grateful to see the outside. Until I felt their plastic fingers digging into me and pulling me back in. I felt my body lift off the ground as they turned me toward them. That horrible image left me feeling helpless, a mass of twisted arms holding me in place as I cried and screamed. I flailed, pleading with them, wanting to be far away from there. Hope was fleeting. In my desperation, I placed my feet against them and pushed with all the strength I could muster. Slowly, I could see their limbs separating, until finally they gave out, and I fell onto the cold, wet pavement. They stood there in the doorway watching me, unmoving, staring from the darkness. It seemed like they couldn't step through, and for a moment, I thought I was free. Then the one that looked like Andy took a disjointed step forward. It took me only a moment to gather myself up before storming out of there. I just ran. I ran without stopping, never looking back. The entire time I thought about those things, no explanation for any of it. Replaying the night's events over and over. All I wanted to do was get home. Once I arrived back at my apartment, I tried to calm down and thought maybe it was all a prank. A very elaborate prank. It had to be. I lay in bed, unable to fall asleep. Unable to forget their faces. Then I remembered the stupid rules, especially the last one. 5. Once all tasks have been completed, walk backwards out of the building while reciting the words on the coin. Do not leave without doing so. When I first read it, I thought it completely absurd. But the more I dwelled on it, after all that happened, the more I realized that maybe it wasn't a game. It felt more like a ritual than anything. To keep whatever was in there from leaving. Maybe I should have followed the instructions. I looked around for the coin and fished it out of my pants pocket, looking at it under the glow of the moon. Molly Monent, non sequitur. My eyes wandered to the window, overlooking the empty street, yet somehow I wasn't surprised at what I saw. They're outside right now, watching me from the tree line. I shouldn't have looked at them. Acknowledged their presence. I should have just followed the instructions, exactly as they were written. I wonder if they'll follow me forever, or if anyone else can even see them. But maybe, if I can trap them back inside the store and recite those words, everything will be okay. It had to be. Maybe. It's not too late.